the American people aren't just disappointed with what's going on in Washington. They're not just displeased. They're offended. They're disgusted. What is happening in Washington right now is repugnant. It is obscene. It is an affront to the principles upon which this nation was founded. People are angry, and they ought to be. I loved Pastor Dunn's introduction. We have a lot to rejoice over and a lot to celebrate about. But as Reed said, we have a lot to be concerned about as well. The ship of state is listing. It is listing badly in very stormy waters. There are so many issues we need to discuss. Water rights and property rights, federal budget issues. We could go on and on. But I want to talk about what happened over the weekend, that offensive vote that was cast Sunday night, as a symptom of what's gone wrong in Washington. And I want to draw some lessons about it that help us all, I think, remember why we're in this fight together. You know that Sunday night, the House of Representatives passed Obamacare, this mammoth top-down command and control centralized government takeover of nearly a fifth of the U.S. economy, involving something as personal as your health and your medical care, on the slenderest of margins, 219 to 212 votes. 216 were needed to pass, so there was just a margin of 3 to spare. 4 votes had switched, we would have defeated it. Now, all of you know that this legislation was bought and paid for through bribery, through outright public bribery. The Cornhusker kickback, the Gatorade, the Louisiana Purchase, you've seen it all. But those are your tax dollars. That's not some abstract pot of money that just gets invented. That money comes from one of 3 places. It is taxed from the fruits of your labors. It is borrowed and placed on the heads of my children. Or it is inflated by stealing the money you've already earned and put away. Those are real dollars, and they were being paid as outright bribes to get people to vote for something that they knew was not in the country's best interest, that they knew that the American people had studied carefully for a year and resoundingly rejected. Now let's talk a bit about what this health care scheme involves. We could go on and on and on. This 2,700-page behemoth has so many bad ideas, you hardly know where to start. Look at what it does to taxation. This is the largest tax increase in the history of the Republic, excluding wartime and the Great Depression. And what kinds of taxes does it raise? At a time when people are struggling to start businesses or even maintain good businesses, we add a mammoth expansion of taxation on investment income. How is that going to help resuscitate the economy? In a bill that is supposed to help people with medical needs, we tax medical devices. For the first time, a special tax will apply. So if you need a prosthetic device, if you need a defibrillator implanted, you're going to pay a tax on that. How is that going to further the cause of good health care? Well, it doesn't, because it's not about health care, it's about control. It's not about how much is spent on health care, it's about who does the spending and who gets to make the decisions. The taxation is bad enough, but beyond that, we have a whole scheme of fines and fees and penalties and mandates. Set aside the economic effects. Set aside the catastrophic consequences for government spending over the long term. Set aside what it's going to cost you in taxation and penalties and fees. By the way, the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, estimates that this is going to raise health insurance premiums immediately by 10 to 13%. They're forecasting 8% plus rises in perpetuity. So the stated objective of the plan to control costs is also false. But beyond all that, there are a host of mandates. There are mandates on employers, mandates on physicians and other medical providers, mandates on individual citizens, which I personally believe violate the U.S. Constitution. And accompanying these are a scheme of rules and regulations so convoluted and so complex that it needs to be administered by no fewer than 53 new federal offices, bureaucracies, programs. We mapped this out. In fact, the Republican staff of the Joint Economic Committee did. We've got it on a big wall chart in the office because I want people to realize what's at stake here. Instead of a doctor-patient relationship, there's the doctor-53 bureaucracy-patient relationship. That strikes at the heart, not just of what medical care is about, but what citizenship is about. And this is what I want to move on to. This bill isn't bad just because it's expensive, although it is. This bill isn't bad just because it places unconscionable burdens on medical providers, although it does. This bill isn't just bad because it's stuffed with mandates and penalties and fees and fines and rules and regulations and bureaucracies and programs and offices, although it certainly does that. This bill is bad because it fundamentally alters the relationship of the citizen and the citizen's government. This is really about the role of government and what it means to be a citizen of this once free republic. Now, if that sounds harsh, let's talk about some of the specifics. President Obama was asked whether he believed in American exceptionalism. And he said, well, sure, the way Brits think Britain is exceptional and Greeks think Greece is exceptional. Isn't that a contemptuous answer? Let me tell you what I believe when I say America is exceptional. The Founding Fathers were exceptional statesmen who drafted an exceptional declaration that recognized our natural God-given rights. They drafted an exceptional constitution that has never been equaled in the history of the world as a mechanism for we, the sovereign people, to delegate certain limited enumerated powers to a government that was subject to the consent of the governed. And they created an exceptional country that has been an unparalleled force for good. Nowhere in the history of the world can you find a nation with the power that this one has and the generosity that this one has demonstrated. Time after time, we have saved those who are subject to despotisms of their own making. Time after time, we have gone to rescue those in need. Time after time, American soldiers have paid the price with their blood, and we, the taxpayers, have paid the price with our treasure. This is an exceptional nation. But at root, what makes it exceptional is this revolutionary notion that power was not something government held, that rights were not things that were conferred by government or by the rulers at their discretion. Rights weren't even subject to debate by the people as a whole. Rights weren't something you achieved through democratic consensus. Rights were the inalienable endowment of a loving creator. You know these words, say them with me. We hold these truths to be that all men are created, that they are endowed by, with certain, that among these are, and here comes the important part, that to secure these rights, governments were instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new governments for their safety and security. You see, we the people are sovereign, and we delegate certain limited enumerated powers to the government. Those powers are set forth in a written constitution which the Founding Fathers bequeathed to us as the best mechanism of guaranteeing the liberty they had fought to provide to us. What is at stake here is that great constitutional experiment. Because the explicit aim of the Obama administration and the Democratic majority in Congress is to remake America as a European-style social welfare cradle-to-grave nanny state. Here is how they see the citizen. The citizen is a helpless victim who needs to be taken care of by these benign overseers in Washington who know better than we do what's best for us. Conservatism offers an alternative vision. I don't mind being labeled a conservative if you give me the opportunity to explain what it is that I wish to conserve. And it's this. Thomas Jefferson summed up the American ideal this way. A wise and frugal government, he said, shall restrain men from injuring one another, and shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry, and shall not take from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned. This, he said, is the sum of good government. And that thought finds reflection over and over and over throughout American history. One of my favorite presidents, Calvin Coolidge, said in his inauguration, I aim to let the people of America work less for the government and more for themselves. I aim to let them keep the fruits of their own labors. That, he said, is the chief meaning of freedom. Well, he was right. Now, a government that robs Peter to pay Paul can always count on the support of Paul, can't it? The problem with socialism, though, is eventually you run out of other people's money. We're seeing that happen internationally. Many of you have seen in the newspapers how Greece is about to go off a fiscal cliff. Greece is like a canoe 20 yards above the lip of Niagara Falls. And they're paddling faster downstream. America is only 100 yards upstream from Greece. I am saying, let's paddle for shore while we can. The Obama administration is saying, let's hurry and catch up so we can be just like them. That's what's at stake at this election. John Adams, our great second president, said, there are two ways to enslave a people. One is by arms, the other is by debt. Our current congressional overseers have chosen the latter. That is a price we are not willing to pay. Now, let me take just a second. Healthcare is just one example of many. By the way, have you noticed that I haven't mentioned the incumbent yet? The guy against whom I'm running? And it's because he truly doesn't matter. We might as well have given a proxy vote to Nancy Pelosi. You name the issue. You name the issue, your so-called representative is on the wrong side. You know, healthcare bill, he was one of just a handful of votes that put it over the top. Cap and trade, this preposterous notion that what you exhale, CO2, is a pollutant that the government ought to regulate. By the way, my former employer, the Heritage Foundation, says this cap and trade bill will raise energy costs for the average household by $3,000 per year forever. Now think of your family budget. Do you feel like writing $3,000 more a year in checks to PG&E? That's apart from the taxes. That's just the energy costs. Well, cap and trade. McNerney voted for it. Obviously, all of us are against it. The so-called stimulus, which hasn't stimulated anything but government spending and federal debt. He voted for it. We're disgusted by it. You know, who ought to be the face of Congress? He voted for Nancy Pelosi. Would any of us cast that vote? So I'm not talking about the incumbent a lot because the incumbent is just a conduit for the will of the Democratic majority. If you're happy with that, I think you're at the wrong breakfast. Let me take just a minute to talk about our situation internationally. And my staffers are all giving me various signs. They're making nooses, so I can tell the hook's about to come. I wish we had time to go through all of the critical issues facing the country right now and to show how what is happening in Washington isn't just expensive, it isn't just inconvenient, it isn't just purchased through taxpayer-funded bribery, but it's an affront to the ideals of the American founding. It represents a fundamental attempt to transform the relationship between the citizen and the state. It is our freedom that's at stake. Internationally, what is happening troubles me just as much. Of all the cesspools in the world, of all the barbaric despotisms that are threatening their neighbors, North Korea, Iran, on, what is the one nation that the Obama administration has worked up the moral courage to beat up on? Israel. Israel puts up a couple condos in East Jerusalem, and she experiences the full weight of the ire of the State Department, public snubbing by the US. Let me get this straight. The administration apparently doesn't have any problems with Iran building nukes, but Israel wants to put up some housing in Jerusalem, of all places, and they're going to pay the price. This isn't moral equivalence. This is siding with America's enemies. The idea that we offer an open hand in negotiations without preconditions to people like Ahmadinejad and whoever that lunatic is that runs North Korea, I mean, you can't get the administration to treat Fox News that well. As the brother of a commander in the US Navy who has routinely put himself in harm's way, doing Navy SEAL insertions and extractions, combat search and rescue, and that sort of thing, as somebody who comes from a military family, I have infinite respect for what the men and women of America's armed forces have achieved in Iraq. It is a victory worth celebrating. What they are achieving in Afghanistan but if America ceases to be exceptional here, make no mistake, we will cease to play that role overseas. Look at the history of all the Western democracies that have turned into welfare states. What's the first casualty? Their military capability. If you're busy taking care of the people so nobody is sick or hungry or sober, you just don't have the vigor or the will to fund a military anymore. America is a tremendous force for good around the world, here at home. We're in this because we want to be able to look our children in the eye with a clear conscience a few years from now and say, when it was at stake, when things were dire, we did everything in our power to keep you free. For your willingness to join me in that endeavor, I am most grateful. Thank you for your time.